And we're live. So it's good to be with you here this evening. We are in Genesis 21. Do you remember your ears tonight, Mark?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Good.
I was trying to figure out how to get Genesis 17 information to Genesis 21. Didn't work.
Genesis 21, we'll read verses 1 through 7 to start off here. Then the Lord took note of Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, and God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." And he said, and she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Okay. What do we think about that? Mindy says hello.
Obviously, it was miraculous birth. Sarah was past the age of childbearing, which would bring to mind another miraculous birth of Christ. I don't know if the two are connected.
Well, and theologically, I think they're very closely connected. I mean, this is God working to bring about a child where a child could not be conceived otherwise, and that's the case with Mary as well. Mary, this sounds very difficult, doesn't it? To take a barren woman past the age of childbearing, her husband's really old, she's really old, and she has a son. That's impossible, really. Jesus takes that, he kind of flips it around, but it takes the difficulty level off the charts. I mean, it's a young girl that's never been with a man, so it's impossible. And were you going to say something?
That's kind of old for having a baby.
For having your first one too, huh?
Yeah. I don't know.
So you and Darius aren't going to have any more kids, you don't think? No, you're done with that. You had two good girls, so stop it at that, huh?
We got a boy, kind of like.
Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the birth of Isaac?
Well, there's many things that when you think about things in the human or normal quote unquote perspective, they're just so, we're talking about, from our perspective, how we would deal with it, how this or that or whatever, and that it's God's doing this. And it's God's time, it's God's plan, and God's gonna, you're gonna get through it because this is what God wants you to do, and it's just, it's, we gotta remember who's in charge, basically.
Isaac is a child of promise. This is God keeping his promises. And Ishmael, who has not been brought up yet, but will soon be brought up, is a child of the flesh. It's a child of normal, even that, maybe not even normal, but still exceptional, but possible human interaction, as opposed to Isaac, who is absolutely impossible. A child that could never be is actually here. And boy, was it a long time coming, wasn't it? When you read the story, you get a sense. And I think the way the delays work and the other side stories and everything, Isaac is inevitable, but he keeps getting delayed. He keeps getting put off. And finally, he's here. It's like waiting at I guess this is not a problem at the Walla Walla airport where you show up and your flight gets canceled and you wait for the next flight that's an hour later or whatever. You only have 2 flights a day, so it's not a big problem there. But when you're at SeaTac, and your flight's supposed to leave at 10 and they move it back to 11 and they move it back to 12 and they move it back to 1, and it just keeps waiting. And then you finally get on the plane. It seemed like it was never going to happen, but now you're there. Well, that's kind of a minor comparison, a much less emotional accomplishment than it is to have this child. That, again, Sarah finally gets to fulfill her purpose for her whole life. And when you're a woman in this culture and all you are and all you can really hope to be is a wife and a mother, and you don't really get to be, in a way, you're a wife, certainly, but when you don't get to be the mother for almost your entire life, you're frustrated with your purpose. You're not getting to do what you're here to do. And finally, she gets that fulfillment. And she talks about her laughter. We talked about Sarah's laughter a few weeks ago being what? A time when her faith fails her. She can't really believe.
She didn't believe what she heard. Basically.
Now it's laughter again, but it's laughter of joy, tears of joy. And the world will laugh with me, right? Not at me. Most of the time when people are laughing in your direction, they're laughing at you, aren't they? They're laughing something you did. Some unfortunate set of circumstances have brought people's humor to bear on you, and that is because you have done something foolish. When I was in high school, we had, I guess it was study hall. I'm trying to remember what I was doing in there. I guess it was study hall. Maybe it was detention. I don't know. But I think it was study hall. And we had a huge cafeteria. My graduating class was 400. So, and I know there's high schools that are a lot bigger than that, but 400 is pretty big. And so there were 1,200 of us in high school, not 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And so we had a really big cafeteria, and they had these pillars. I'm guessing they weren't randomly scattered throughout. I'm guessing they were purposefully placed wherever they were. And I was walking, I don't know exactly, maybe I'd gotten out of study hall to go to a doctor's appointment or something. I was walking across, and I was talking to somebody, and I was looking one way, and I walked right into one of the pillars. And I made about 60, 70 kids laugh, They weren't laughing with me at that point. They were laughing at me, and I guess I deserved it. But that's the normal course of things. People laugh at your circumstances. Here, Sarah is in on the laugh. She's so joyful, so filled with her own humor, just so happy about what has happened. Finally, when it finally comes, again, maybe even it's hard for us because we know how the story turns out. To get that sense, but when you're reading the story and you're learning it for the first time, and maybe most of what you hear is not sitting down and reading yourself, but oral tradition, sitting around the campfire at night, Dad's telling the story, and Dad keeps going off on these sidetracks. He never gets to the story, and then finally here it is: Isaac has been born. God's great mercies come on his schedule, his time, and as hard as it is to accept, the longer it takes to get here, the greater the mercy is, really. The greater the miracle, the greater display of his power. Having it 10 or 15 years earlier would have undermined the display of the power. This is greater than that. The child of the flesh is in the background now, because here is the son in whom Abraham and Sarah is well pleased, Isaac. Ray, you have a...
Just going back to chapter 18, where you were just talking about Sarah kind of lacked faith and laughing. Not
Yes.
only did she laugh because she didn't believe it, but she denied laughing. And here she's kind of openly, proclaiming it, kind of hallelujah.
It's the total remedy of the situation. God comes in and makes her joy complete. And this is, I think mentioned it's been a while, but every miraculous birth in the Bible is that of a boy. And that's maybe a little hard. I mean, if you wrote the story now and it went through all the editors and everything, you got to go back and change this. You got to make some of the kids that were born miraculously girls. And I can kind of understand that mentality, that it does seem to elevate. And first of all, it was prophesied that would be a boy in this case. But that is what would make Sarah's joy absolutely complete, is to have a boy. And we can critique that mindset all we want, and there's maybe fair. But it doesn't change the reality of that culture in which sons took care of their mothers. So a son being born, even to a mother of this age, you're starting out with a baby. It's kind of hard to think this is going to be this is my Social Security plan. You're really old and now you have a baby that you're still going to be around long enough for him to take care of you. That's not what needed to happen because she predeceased Abraham, but that's the significance, the cultural significance of why boys were treasured. Boys, in a sense, the first boy belonged to the mother. The mother would belong to him. The girls belonged to the dad. The girls were sold for the bride price. So they belonged to their dad. This belongs to her. Yes, it's Abraham's and all that, but this is just absolutely the best case scenario for Sarah. This is the fully making her joy, fully completing her joy, to have a baby and to have it be a boy. And hopefully we've kind of gotten to the point now where we love our daughters as much as we love our sons. And they both bring us the same amount of joy. But yes, ma'am.
Says that first, this is a thing, Genesis 26, it says that same day, Abraham was circumcised and his son Ishmael, and all the men of his house born in the house were bought with money. For a foreigner, does that mean they were bought with money?
It means Abraham owned slaves.
Oh, the slaves were
Slaves were circumcised too.
but they bought them.
Your boss joins a new church and you've got to pay the price, so to speak.
Really? They bought with money in the corner. Okay.
Yeah, it was. Isaac is circumcised on the 8th day. So this is again the completion of the covenant, and Isaac is born into the covenant. Now Isaac is assured of things too, but we start getting this sense of inheriting this calling. That it's such a family thing that you don't decide necessarily to be a child of God. You are the child. You are the child of promise. You exist because God kept his promises. You wouldn't exist otherwise. And it starts from the time you're born and it goes until you die. And this is a message that Israel, they don't take this, okay, I'm going to get saved. I'm going to be born again. I'm going to be baptized. I'm going to do all these things because I've reached the age of accountability. I've decided to follow Jesus. I've decided to be a child of God. It's a birthright. It's what goes with being born to Jewish parents. And all the obligations, they go with it too. And they start out by keeping the obligations with your body before you have any say so. So this is the the stuff that we descend from, theologically, spiritually, these are our ancestors. This is what we come down from. And it's beautiful and powerful in its own way, and yet doesn't always sit real well with us, with our current sensibilities, with our current emphasis on the individual, their current emphasis on freedom being defined as self-determination. If you're free, it means you can be and do whatever you want. That's freedom. And that just was not a concept. I mean, you didn't go around just doing whatever you wanted to, unless you were a very wealthy, powerful man in this culture. You didn't just do whatever you wanted to. You had to keep your place in the culture, in the society, in the family. You had a role, and you fulfilled that role. Any other thoughts there before we move on from the birth of Isaac? Okay, let's pick up at verse 8, and we'll read through 21. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Now Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. Therefore she said to Abraham, "Drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. For through Isaac your descendants will be blessed. And of the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder. And he gave her the boy and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was used up, she left the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, about a bow shot away, for she said, "Do not let me see the boy die." And she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. God heard the lad crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter with you, Hagar? Do you not fear? For God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Okay.
A lot of these trivial little things that you don't notice before, but at 16, it says that she sat opposite him about a bow shot away. And then later in 20, he becomes an archer. So there was something, she knew something about, 'cause it says there was a bow shot away. And anyway,
It's a neat little trick in the story, isn't it? A way to kind of tie things together.
How old was he when he left?
I forgot to look that up. That's a good question.
I was thinking that
Like 10 or
he
12.
was a teenager.
Yeah, that's a
But
good
doesn't
question.
sound like it here.
It doesn't sound like a little teenager making fun of his little brother when everybody's making such a big deal. Oh, Isaac is getting weaned. Oh. You must not have had a little brother. You were the little brother, weren't you, Mark? You didn't know how little mocking that was going on when you were a baby.
Yeah, that was a ornery little.
Watch it now. How hard is it to have children that don't have the same set of parents living under the same roof? Sometimes it depends, I guess, how it works, how well it works, and sometimes it's very difficult. But it's something that if you want to take these stories and really apply them to everyday life that people face in the world today, the challenge of blended family. And when you have a child born to one father or one mother and now has a half sibling living in the house, it can be a very difficult situation. It can be one which really puts the parents, the adults, at odds with one another. And it's something that, it doesn't fit in the, a lot of times in church narratives, we don't really get into this because for this to happen, something less than the ideal has to occur, right? Somebody either died or got divorced for this to happen, or there was a child born without the benefit of marriage. So you have these kind of undesirable outcomes leading to this reality that is so common in our culture today, which is children of different parents. Sometimes they're not even half siblings, they are step siblings. And if we think that it's just going to be easy to do that, then we're kind of deluding ourselves, aren't we? And it seems to be, it's not the case here. Here the case is two different mothers, but it seems to be a case when I don't know, you law enforcement guys can correct me on this, but whenever a child is killed and the male in the house is not the father, the overwhelming majority of the time, it's that stepfather or boyfriend of the mother or whatever that is responsible for the death of that child, boy or girl. There's kind of something instinctive about, I guess, humans and the male wanting his DNA to keep going. And when he looks down and that's not his DNA, eating food, taking up space in his little area, like lions, when one big male lion gets beaten and run off or killed by another big male lion, and the other one moves in and takes over the pride, first thing he does is kill all the cubs. Now that's remote from us, and that, no excuse for that. But it kind of, at the very least, should warn us that it's not easy to raise other people's children or to be around other people's children in your home long term. And Sarah does not want Ishmael in the house with Isaac. This is, I think, another case where the portrayal, the bad guy ends up being a bad gal in the book of Genesis. Genesis just does not portray women overall particularly well. Abraham understands the difficulty, but appears to be willing to deal with it and to live with it. Live in less than ideal circumstances. Live in a situation where, here's my baby mama and her baby, and here's my wife and our baby.
We got a lot of stuff in our world today.
We sure do. Yeah.
What's that doing to the kids?
It's
We don't
hard.
speak about the children very much in that sense, but there are a lot of kids in this world who don't know where they're supposed to be, how they're going to get here or there. It's tough.
Now, the stress that's put on the parents is visited very much upon the children. I mean, it just can't be shielded from it. So this is a story that kind of, I think, allows us to say that, in a sense, this is nothing new. That this has always happened. And if you look at the biblical stories, whenever you see a story, particularly of a child that's conceived out of wedlock, it's not presented to glorify that or anything like that, but it acknowledges the reality that happens. has always happened and probably always will happen. And the child, if we don't treat them right, if they survive, they're probably going to turn to violence. And you see that in the Judges. You see that with Jephthah, shunned by his legitimate, or he's an illegitimate child, shunned by that, he runs to power through violence. And then that is visited upon his daughter. So how do we treat these children that come to us in less than perfect, less than ideal, less than dreamed of circumstances? It's already happened with Lot and his daughters. Well, how does God treat it? Of the children of Lot and his daughters, I'm going to make them great nations. With Ishmael, I'm going to make him a great nation. God can dwell with this. God can live with this. He can redeem this.
We forget that sometimes. God can do it. I'm sorry, but we're human beings who see things in normal kinds of things, and sometimes we forget how powerful God is in what he can do and not do and give us in our lives if we're willing. But we have to learn to be willing too, do we not?
Yes. And we have to see that it doesn't excuse the behavior or whatever happened to begin with, but it shows God's power for redemption. David and Bathsheba, sin. David certainly, we'll talk about that some other day with him and Bathsheba, but David's sin is great. I mean, it's horrible. It ends up being murder. And the child that David and Bathsheba conceive dies. The son of David dies. But then Bathsheba legitimately becomes David's wife. That's a hard thing to think about, isn't it? She becomes his wife. What does God do? Who's the next child Bathsheba conceives? Solomon, the heir to the throne. And like you said, we put limits. God can't fix this. God can't redeem this. God can't take this bad situation and bring something good out of it. Yes, he can. He can bring something good out of a terrible relationship with Lot and his daughters. He can bring something good out of Ishmael's life. He can bring something good out of David and Bathsheba. If God can redeem David and Bathsheba, he can redeem anything.
We forget.
And we don't acknowledge. And I think more than just forgetting, we don't acknowledge that that's what God has done. And we are so embarrassed by the David and Bathsheba story, we even forget that Solomon came out of that relationship. And Solomon's flawed too, and and I'm not trying to say perfection came out of it, but Solomon is the son of David, in whom David is well pleased and will ultimately ascend to the throne. So and all the parallel prophecies that point to Jesus, a lot of them also point to Solomon. So he's a chosen vessel as well, out of this sinful, certainly imperfect union. So, when you look at blended family, I wasn't raised in one. I can't imagine myself as a stepfather. I really can't. Because if I'm going to be held responsible, I want control. And then with a stepchild, you are mostly responsible. If they're living in the home, you're responsible. You can't control them, though, really. You can't do what... Sherry can tell you, maybe I've told it before, the story of me. We went and babysat, for her best friend and her husband on their anniversary. That was our gift, our anniversary present, and we'll go babysit. And they had a little boy, and he was kind of like Mark was when he was a little boy. He was an ornery little cuss. He's a good kid, but there was an incident. I didn't lay a hand on him. I didn't even really yell at him. I spoke firmly and harshly to him a little bit, but I did not yell at that kid. And that kid looked at me like he'd never been spoken to that way in his whole life. But he needed it. I don't know what he was doing. He was going to hurt himself or break something expensive. So He can do that with his parents. I don't care. You're not going to do it on my watch. You know, and that kid looked at me and I looked at him and I thought, I need to go for a walk. Here's what I need. Because this is not my kid, you know. I know what would have happened to me if my mom had seen me doing what he was doing. You know, I know what would have happened. And that was really what should have happened. But I'm not empowered to do that. I was not empowered in that situation. And yet, if he falls down and breaks his neck, I might get sued or something, you know. So it's, you know, that's kind of how I look at this. I know they're challenging, even though I haven't experienced it personally, even though wasn't raised in a blended house and have never been a part of a blended household. I know it's challenging. I think the worst thing we can do is say, like, it should not be. It should be easy as pie. It shouldn't be any problem whatsoever. And if we want to say that, that's fine, but it's not biblical. I mean, the biblical pattern here is it's difficult. It's difficult to have two children with two different mothers in the same house. It's already been a little bit difficult once, hasn't it? Sarah sent her packing once already. And Sarah sent her packing again. But Ishmael is not forgotten. The child of the flesh is not forgotten. Abraham loves him. God loves him. God, the angel of God speaks to him, calls to Hagar on the child's behalf. So he's not forgotten. He's just not favored.
That still hurts, though.
It hurts.
To us humans, it still hurts.
It's a precursor to Jacob and Esau. Once again, I mean, we'll close on this. The book of Genesis is ultimately a collection of brother stories. You know, Psalm, I think at 131, how wonderful it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. It's wonderful. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen very often. And when it does happen, it's because God makes it happen. These are all brother stories, and in most of them, the older brother, like Ishmael, the older son, normally would have the preeminence in inheritance, status. He's the firstborn son. But in God's working, that gets flipped. In these brother stories, normally the older one, Esau, is born before Jacob. God chooses Jacob, not because Jacob's such a great kid either. Joseph is much younger, but he is the firstborn of the wife in whom Jacob is well pleased. So it's really hard. It's hard, and if we think these are just fairy tales back in the past and they don't speak to us today, well, this is a case where it really does. If you go out and you talk to people and you minister to people, you're most of the time going to be dealing with broken families. Less than 50% of the time will it be mom and daddy have been together all along and only the kids in the house are both of theirs. That's going to be less than 50% of the time. And that's, how do we deal with it? Can we live with it? Abraham could live with it. God can live with it. Sarah couldn't. So, okay. Mr. Cole, will you lead us in a closing prayer, please, sir? Hi, Nell. Nell says hi.